Well, good evening and welcome back to our 3-week adventure series on home relationships during lockdown. And I hope you enjoyed last week, and thanks for joining us again this evening. But if you're joining us for the first time, then welcome also. You're in for a real treat tonight, as our hosts for the series are Jonathan and Andrea Taylor-Cummings, and we should see them right now. Say hello, folks.
Hey, hello, good evening, everybody.
Great to be with you.
Jonathan and Andrea have been in a relationship education for over 25 years, and they've been helping people take personal responsibility in their relationships. They teach skills around 4 key habits, which you can find out about on their TEDx talk on YouTube.
And the link for that should come up in the chat very soon. Tonight's session is entitled Managing Conflict When Emotions Are Running High. And obviously in these lockdown periods, that can be quite often. And you can remember that tonight is an interactive session. So we want you to ask questions. There's a chat system in Facebook, so pop your questions in there and join in and have some fun. Say hello now if you're joining us. We'd love to see who's on. And also, if you've got a question you're thinking, I don't know if I want to mention that because they might think it's me, just put it in the fashion of, my next door neighbour asked me this, so I thought I'd ask it. So you can do that. But we never have any conflict, do we? And that's because Maria's always right.
So say all of us, right?
Well, on that note, over to you, Jonathan and Andrea.
Yeah, there are lots of jokes about that, but I think we'll pass on those ones this time. Don't want to get myself into trouble here. Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome. I know some of you will be live, or a good number of you are live now, but there'll be some watching this on the recording later. So welcome to you as well. Whenever you join, as Trevor said, it's a very interesting topic we have lined up for this evening.
Yeah, we're really excited about sharing this topic. Hi to everybody. We've seen all the messages coming in. That's wonderful. We're really looking forward to just sharing some principles and some tips. I was going to say we all face it, but we just said we don't, but we do. We all face.
That's reality.
Yeah, and we love doing this session because we know just helping everybody develop a different perspective, a better perspective on what conflict is and how to do conflict well will instantly just change how things happen at home.
Absolutely. Yeah? And conflict is a big subject. So we've got a pretty action-packed evening this evening. The next 20-30 minutes are going to be pretty action-packed. So if you haven't got your notebook with you, you might want to grab it. There may be a few little tips to put down on there. So grab that. If you've got your little phone, you can type in there and put some notes in there. But you probably will want to take a few notes as we're going to be going at quite a pace.
So last week, we looked at the differences and we realized that we're all wired differently and that under lockdown, when we're invading each other's space 24/7, the differences get magnified. And even in the healthiest of relationships, the best of relationships at the best of times, we will have an occasion where we just don't see things eye to eye and we end up in some kind of conflict or argument, even anger. And it just gets worse under lockdown because right now I think our emotions our stress levels are a little bit heightened. Maybe our fuses tend to be shorter than they normally are. And so conflict's going to happen. As we go through, I want to really keep it interactive and just ask you up front, what challenges you the most about conflict? I think we have a slide on it to remind you of the question while we are, let's get the technology going. There we go. What do you find most challenging about conflict? And as you type away, we'll continue. For me, for example, one of the things that I had to learn very early on in my adult life is just how to deal with it when a man in particular would raise his voice and shout, because my dad hardly ever did that. And in like the 2 or 3 occasions I can remember him doing it, when he shouted, even the dog left the house. So for me, it was a moment of, what has gone so terribly wrong? And I carried that into adult life and had to learn how to respond well. So what challenges you? Just write your ideas and your thoughts as we go through. The conflict is inevitable, isn't it?
It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So we have to learn to do it well rather than fear it or run from it, as we're going to be going through in the session very shortly. Conflict is going to happen. Let's not kid ourselves. And really, success comes from learning how to handle it carefully how to look after the relationship through it. No matter how frustrated you get, how angry you get, at the end of the day, if you don't handle the conflict well, that will have an impact on your relationship. You handle it well, on the other hand, and that can actually see your relationship go from strength to strength. So it's really, really important that we learn how to do it. But I appreciate that it is completely easier said than done. And we had when we announced that we're going to be talking about conflict today, in this session, we had a question come through on the
after Sunday's message.
After Sunday's message, actually, in an email, and I'll read it to you. It was a really interesting question, but it basically says, how can I learn to do conflict well when all that has ever been modeled to me as a child is not to discuss, as this leads to sulking and anger from those around me? How do I push through when, as soon as conflict starts, my mind goes blank and all I want to do is just run away? There are a lot of people that feel like that. So it's a brilliant question. And we've actually used it to structure some of the responses this evening. So should we jump in?
Yeah, let's jump in. And I'm noticing, so I like Andy's response. Well, what's his challenge in a conflict situation? Is the other person. Yes.
Yep.
So say all of us.
Yep.
Not having time to formulate my thoughts. We're going to come back to that because that's a great point. And different ways of thinking and dealing with things, which is exactly what we started with last week. That's where conflict starts.
Except I was going to say, that old adage, when you point your finger at somebody, you've got three fingers pointing back at you. So you might want to watch out for that one. So I think if there are three things to say about how you manage conflict effectively, the first thing you've got to do really is get in the right mindset. You've got to approach conflict with the right frame of mind, because far too many people think that conflict is bad and you want to avoid it at all costs. The amount of people we've spoken to who've said, actually, you know what? For a peaceful life, I'll just let it go. The problem is, if you do that, all that ends up happening is, yes, maybe the other person is not that you don't frustrate or anger or what have you, but you end up building the frustration. So you ain't helping the relationship by doing that. You want to do something that you have to address it. It's just, how do you address it? So the mindset shouldn't be you want to run from conflict. The mindset should be we need to address it. The question is, how do you do it? Because
when we do it well, we actually we strengthen the relationship, we build more understanding, and we build intimacy, because there isn't anything, what's the word? Not just crowding the space, but creating distance in the relationship.
Well, one of the things we do that's important to recognize is, from last week, we spoke about conflict around the differences, and we said that when people have differences, they rub up against each other, and it's those differences that cause conflict. So that should tell you straight away that because we're not all the same, conflict is going to happen. And there was some research done, I think it was back in the 1960s, group theory in organizational behavior. Well, that's the topic for today. Be careful not crushing, which
right, there's the second habit. So
habit number two.
Habit number two is all about how do you manage conflict.
How do you manage it, which is not the easy thing to do. But if you go back to what I was saying about group theory from the 1960s, what it says is all groups, whether you're a team of 2 or a team of 22, as long as more than one person comes together, you're going to have conflict at some point. Now, of course, it may not be off the charts conflict, but there's going to be some sort of conflict at some point. And that's what in this chart here is called storming. Now, for any team to get to performing, you've got to go through these 4 stages of forming, storming, norming, performing. Many of you will have come across this before. But the point is, it's not a straight line to get through from, once you've had a bit of storming, you don't then go from norming to performing. You go from norming, you go back to storming, you go to norming, you go back to storming. It's kind of snakes and ladders, or as the Americans call it, chutes and ladders, I discovered the other day. But it is a backwards and forwards process as you discover new sources of challenge all the while.
Just to explain the norming. So forming is literally just coming together, whether it's with your partner, your spouse, your children. It's that one-on-one interaction with anybody. Storming is when you start discovering those differences and having to discuss it or argue it through. Sometimes it can get really intense. Norming is when you agree a way forward, because and that's how the relationship grows and becomes more intimate, because you discuss things, you lay them on the table, and you agree what will work for you to make the relationship work. And that's how you get to performing. But you can storm over different issues. It could be money one time. It could be where you're going to live, whose career should come first, etc., etc. Lots of different things. Yeah.
Now, part of the challenge is we come into conflict and approach it with the sort of mindset of what we've seen modeled to us, as indeed the question pointed out, whether it's our parents, whether they did that right or wrong, we kind of come in with that expectation in mind.
And in the office as well,
and
because
the
managers set the cultures, don't they?
Yeah. But what that ends up meaning is that there are actually four typical ways that most people, one of four ways that most people address conflict. And we just wanted to step through them very quickly because they are very important. And you might actually start to identify yourself, other people around you as we go through these. I'm hoping you will. The first of them, just very quickly, is a winner's approach. This is the mindset that I'm right, they're wrong, and come hell or high water, I'm going to show them that I'm right and they're wrong. It's people who are very set in their views. They want to impose their views. They want to win at all costs. It is a very me-centered approach. It's all about why I'm right and you're wrong. And it's not really focused on getting the right solution or resolution to this conflict. It's all about me just demonstrating why I'm right. And it may be that I'm right, but actually what you'll come to realize in relationships, being right all the time isn't helpful for the relationship.
Yeah.
Proving that you're right all the time isn't helpful.
Yeah, I was going to say that reminded me of a question that Trevor asked just at the end of the session last week.
That's right.
Which was about people who end up leaving relationships because they just say they need space. And if you find that you're winning all the time, and I get it, I like to win in an argument because I really buy into my own rhetoric. I believe my own thoughts, and I do think I'm right. So does Jon. So we have really interesting discussions. But we learn to argue better. The point is, if you're always winning, you could be suffocating the other person. And we know of a couple where the husband left in the end, where he said, do you remember the one who said, I have had to give in so many times all my life. I felt like I needed to take control of one decision. The only decision I could take control of is to leave. And that's really sad if it gets there. Yeah. So that can be the trouble. And I thought about that after the session and wanted to bring that up. Yeah. That's why some people might need space, and we don't want to get there.
Well, giving in actually or yielding is another default that some people choose to do, to surrender, to give in, to yield. There's some types of people who find that actually okay to do. Now, not for everybody. Some people that you in some relationships, you can have two winners together, and both of you can't win every time. So one ends up having to give in or to yield. And when one is forced to yield more often than they would like, they get to the point where they snap and they just come back with an irrational, just digging their heels in for something which seems pretty petty because they've just been pushed too far. So it actually is not a very helpful response as well. The third natural style is to withdraw. And again, there's some people who just can't handle conflict. And the moment things get a little bit frosty or beyond frosty, you'll see them heading for the door. Indeed, back to the question that we had raised there, just heading for the door. They can't handle the conflict. It does their head in. But for people who want to win and want to have an argument and thrash it out, often they can't understand that. They'll be chasing this person down to say, come back, let's talk about this, when all they need really is just time out to think about it, process it. They should come back and address it. Of course, you don't want to leave this as a sleeping dog lying, but getting them to come back is important.
Yeah. Well, actually, the person who walks out, and sometimes people need to do that. Somebody said earlier, you can't even think in the moment. And one of the things we'd encourage you to do is think about a caring sentence that you can say, like, I really want to address this, but I can't think straight at the minute. Just give me a moment and I'll come back to it. If you need your space, you should get your space, but then it's your responsibility to come back at a time that you can manage it. Yeah. But we're jumping ahead again.
We are indeed. The fourth one, I'm just jumping. I'm conscious that we're racing through here, but hopefully you're getting the points.
Don't race. We're good. We're good.
So the fourth natural style is compromise, which is all about negotiating. And I think a lot of people misperceive this one to be the ideal because it's about bargaining, it's about meeting halfway. And in business, that's the way that most things operate. You negotiate, and the mindset is, we negotiate as far as we can and try and get the best deal for ourselves, and that's success. The reality, though, is that's not success, because it's not focused on the relationship and what's best for us. It's all about me and how far do I have to go? How far will you push me before I give in?
Do you want to quickly tell the story about the cake?
That's your favorite story. I was
cupcake?
just teasing you up. I know you love telling that story.
Well, there's this story about a dad with two sons and one cupcake, and they wanted to share the cupcake. And so the older boy said, "Daddy, can I cut the cake? Can I get to be the one to cut it?" And of course, you know, in his mind, he's probably thinking he's going to cut it with his own favor in mind. And the dad, in his wisdom, said, "Yes, you can cut the cake, but your brother gets to choose the first half." So you can imagine the precision that he would be applying to cut that cake. And that's what we do with compromise. Nobody wants to give more than they have to. And you end up exhausting yourself trying to find the 50% point when to make the relationship work. You need to give 100% both sides.
We all want cake. Yes, we all want the cake. We all want as much cake as possible for ourselves too.
Yeah.
So the point is made there. I think, you know, compromise, negotiation, bartering is not about. It's not a win-win solution you're looking for there. You're just looking at what's best for you. The goal here is what's best for the relationship, and that's what we want to focus on this evening.
Which might be a totally different solution to what either of you would have thought about on your own, and that's the point.
Yeah.
To open the space to be more creative together about how you can move forward.
Yeah. Now we looked last time we did the session, we looked at personality types. We had, for those who missed it, just very quickly, there's the lion, the otter, the golden retriever, and the beaver.
Just looking at Ben offering donuts instead of a cupcake.
Oh,
yes,
that
Ben.
could work. You can cut that down the middle as well.
How do you divide the jam?
Hope it's in the middle. So with the coming back to the personalities, with the lion, I think there's no it doesn't take much to see that the lion is all about winning. Their natural style is to win. They want to win every argument, and they can end up dominating the relationship and making people feel intimidated. So again, a lion needs to recognize what they're doing, and recognize that that's their natural conflict resolution style, and tone down a little bit if they want to have great relationships.
Yeah.
What do you guys think the otter's natural tendency is? Any comments coming through on the chat? I guess it's going to be, so think about the other two coming through. I'll give you the spoiler alert on this. The otter is the one who wants to negotiate.
We need to move the mouse off of the slide. Yep.
Okay. Sorry. The otter is the one who wants to negotiate and bargain and chat. They're normally pretty articulate people, so they're very good at negotiating, and they're the ones who will chase down other people because they want to finish their conversation. They want to be heard. Remember, we spoke about that in the last session. The golden retrievers. Any guesses for what the golden retriever is likely to do in a conflict? Any guesses? Any quick
Somebody
fingers?
say roll over. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, I guess they're going to roll over when they're out of the room, because golden retrievers are. Oh, I've given it away now. There you go. I lost my order there. Golden retrievers really want to withdraw. They want to get out of there. They're not interested in having confrontation at all.
Yeah.
Their natural style. I guess the person who sent this thing here has a fair bit of the question. Probably has a fair bit of golden retriever in them. They just don't want to address or deal with conflict.
They don't want to damage relationships, and conflict is just emotionally, it can feel emotionally overwhelming because it's so contrary to how they're wired. So they end up withdrawing to a safe space until it feels safe again. And with all these personality types, it's about becoming self-aware, isn't it? Because the more self-aware we become, the more caring we can be in our response. But we're going to talk a bit more about that in a moment.
Yeah. And then the fourth one, which I've given away there now, is the beaver. And the beaver is the one who typically will yield in a conflict situation. Now, remember, as we said last time, we're stereotyping here to make a point. You could be a beaver and a lion as well, so you're not necessarily keen on yielding. But beavers like to have detail, and they like to have everything right. And sometimes if they can't get everything right, they will give in just because they haven't got all the pieces in the puzzle to make it make sense for them, so they may end up giving in and yielding there.
It's basically burying their head in the sand. If I don't know how to solve it right, I'm going to pretend that it's not there and just not look at it.
Yeah. So as we said, none of those four are ideal. What we really want is win-win, and that's what meat I've been racing through to try and get to this evening. That's what we want to really try and address this evening. So the third approach, which really is an us-centered approach, this is all about how do we as a relationship how do we come out of this stronger and better, rather than I win, you run away, I yield, whatever it happens to be? What's the us-centered approach here? And there are three things we want to look at for that, or three stages. We say, look, conflict is going to happen. I think we've proven that now, that it's inevitable. Think of it as a battle. So how do you prepare well for the battle? And again, think of a boxer going into a ring. You don't want to go in there without, in bad shape. Yeah. You want to be at fit, peak of condition, ready to do your business. So prepare for the battle. In the ring, you want to fight fair during the battle, because fighting dirty takes you all down, all manner of rabbit warrens, and you don't want to go there. And then really importantly, restore the connection afterwards. And those are the three things that we want to map out this evening. So Andrew, take it away.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not suggesting at all that you do battle. We're just using
we're not suggesting you have boxing gloves either. You can put those away.
And remember, what we're talking about applies to all your relationships. You'll find the same kind of conflict happening with your children, especially if you have teens and they have very strong opinions about life, and you were never a teen, so you just never understand it in their heads. It could be with your parents, with your colleagues, with your friends. It's just for all of life. Preparing for conflict, it really involves thinking ahead about who you want to be during the conflict situation, no matter how intense it becomes, and how you want to be experienced by the people that you care about, the people you're interacting with. And the first thing to do is to think big picture. Recognize that the relationship and what happens to the relationship through the conflict process quite often is far more important than the thing that you're arguing about. Most times those things don't even feature a month, 6 months down the line. So think big picture, and remember that even in the midst of an argument, this is somebody that you care about. Sometimes it's easier to say than to do, but just plant that seed in that thought in your mind. Remember the golden rule. There's the verse Matthew 7:12, which we all know. Do to others whatever you would like them to do to you. This is the essence of all that is taught in the law and the prophets. If we could only get this right, we would solve so many problems in life and so many conflict situations. What makes it hard is what happens to the brain in conflict. And that's something we want to just touch on really quickly to help you understand what's going on. Because fundamentally, when our emotions are heightened, we're wired for fight or flight. That's the natural response, the reaction that will come out. And that's why all the default responses are so me-centered, because it's about protection.
Human instinct, yeah.
That's our human instinct, our animal instinct, if you will. And so to do conflict well, we need to recognize that our animal instinct often wants to take over our more rational, logical thinking self. And the only way to manage that is to think ahead and have instructions to your brain on what to do when you feel threatened by somebody that you love, or when your emotions are heightened by somebody you care about, as opposed to a genuine danger situation where you really need to fight or flight. And that's the rewiring that we want to get intentional about, because if we don't put those instructions in our head, our brain or fight or flight will just take over and sometimes crush the other person. And that's why habit 2 is be careful not crushing, because that's what can come out the wrong way in a conflict situation. One of the ways to wire or to give our brain the right instruction is to think about ground rules. These are lines that we won't cross unless we won't cross at all, no matter how intense the battle becomes. So for example, Jon and I early on in our marriage agreed 3 ground rules. We would never hit each other. We would never walk out the house on each other in anger. That was a ground rule set more for me, because it just landed so heavily, like he was walking out on the relationship if he ever left. So we agreed we wouldn't do that to each other. And we would never threaten divorce just to be spiteful. We just don't use the D word at all, and confine the conflict within the marriage, knowing that we'll find a way forward. So what ground rules could you set? What do you think you can have as ground rules yourself? One of the ground rules to the question earlier where if you feel overwhelmed or the person you're dealing with is shouting and it's too strong, you could set a ground rule that whenever you feel intimidated or that you're not going to articulate yourself well, find the sentence that you'll say. You could say, we'll address this when the situation's calmer. I can't do it now, but I will come back to it. But some words that are yours that you can remember and that will work for you. Tracy's asking if we can repeat that scripture. So it's Matthew 7:12. Yep. I know our very efficient Ben will have that up on the that's it. Matthew 7:12.
Flashing at you.
Do to others whatever you would like them to do to you. And while we're talking about ground rules, we need to talk about anger management strategies as well, because sometimes, and you'll know yourself, if you find yourself getting intensely angry and maybe even doing things that you're really not proud of, before the next conflict situation, just sit down and think about what a good anger management strategy could be. Meaning, think about what are the things that trigger you to get really angry. And what can you do in the moment? What can you say to yourself? Is it about breathing deep? Is it about walking away? There's a story we like to share about that guy, his anger management strategy with the baby. Do you want to share that one?
Oh, yeah. So just very quickly, there was a guy who found himself at the end of his tether with a young baby after nights and nights of lack of sleep and so on. But anyway, he found himself with this baby screaming. He found himself picking up the baby and shaking the baby. And you can imagine that the horror of his wife coming into the room and seeing dad shaking the baby. And
she grabbed the baby and ran
to the room and locked the door. And he then realized, oh my God, what have I been doing? This is my child. How could I have done such a thing? But he just got himself into this sort of frenzy where that's how he ended up reacting. Anyway, long story short, he was able to come back and apologize and said, look, that's not the person that I want to be. I never want to do that sort of thing again, be in that position. How can you help me manage myself before I ever get to that position again? And they agreed a strategy whereby whenever he felt himself getting to his limit, he would just say, I need to go for a walk. And he would hand over the baby and he'd go and take his walk. And it turns out that, years later, he had never repeated the incident, but he had many a walk because he implemented the strategy. So I guess you've got to know yourself is the point here and have your strategy for when you get to boiling point and just say, actually, you know what, if ever I get in this situation, time out, I need to go and do something else, take myself away, and then I can come back and we can move on from there.
Yeah, we've spoken about it even with the boys. We agree one of the ground rules is that you never walk off and slam doors or lock yourself in the room and not talk. We always say no matter how bad things get, if you need time and space to calm down, that's okay. But you're allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to be rude, and certainly don't cut yourself off so that there is no opportunity to repair it. So think about what would good look like, even in the intensity of an argument. How would you like to turn up for each other? What would you like to do? So ground rules are really important. At the end of the day, it doesn't mean we get it right all the time, but if we don't have a plan, we will never get it right. A plan, ground rules, anger management strategies help us get it right more of the time. And it just avoids us having that sinking feeling when we are so gutted that we turned up wrong, we crushed the other person, we were just horrible and mean. And I always like to share this quote from Maya Angelou that says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, they'll forget what the argument was about, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what we're trying to manage, especially with the people that we care about and interact with. And as Christians, do to others as you would have them do to you, because there'll be a time when you annoy somebody and you'd like them to be more gracious in the response.
Now, if that's what you need to do before the battle, in your preparation, during the battle, you want to fight fair, as we said earlier. And really, there are three things to really focus on for fighting fair during the battle. One is choosing your battles. One is listening versus reloading, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then thirdly, don't be a shrike. And it'd be great if anybody knows what a shrike is out there, but I'll soon tell you if you don't. So choosing your battles is very, very a useful, impactful thing to do against the context of that big picture that Andrea spoke about earlier. When you're preparing for the battle, just think, what's important to me here? Big picture, where do I want to be in 20 years, 30 years, however long it is, ahead of you. We're all at different stages on that journey of life. But big picture, what do I want out of this relationship? It could be with your children, if you've got young kids with you now, in 20 years' time, do you want those kids to be wanting to come home and spend time with you versus, only coming back for handouts or what have you? What kind of relationship do you want to have with them? Because the relationship that you invest in today is the relationship that you will get back, down the road. We're all familiar with the principles of sowing and reaping. If you sow negatively now, don't be surprised if you reap negatively down the road. So choose your battles, choose what's important now. Will it matter in 6 months' time if I let them have this now rather than having to win my point now? Choose your battles and choose wisely. Secondly, actually, there's a scripture we had for that one on choosing your battles, which is, I'm jumping ahead. Choose your battles, Proverbs 17:9, which says, love overlooks the mistakes of others, but dwelling on the failures of others devastates friendships.
Yeah, we really like the Passion Translation for that verse. It's about overlooking the mistake and not diving in.
Yeah.
I just realized that it's 8:30 already, and we still have a few more things that we want to share. So as long as you're happy to be there, we can go for another few minutes to share it with you. Yep. Love the questions coming through.
Yep.
And you're right, Ben. Instead, I like that ground rule. Try not to discuss anything tense after 10 o'clock. Because when we're tired, it doesn't come out right either. And you can agree to disagree and ask if you can revisit it in the morning because you're just too tired to talk about it. It is about caring for each other. Yeah. I really like you're going to talk about listen versus reload.
We love the expression listen versus reload, because in the heat of the battle, you want to take time to actually listen to what is being said. Unfortunately, most of us, when we're supposed to be listening, we're not genuinely listening, are we? A lot of us are just reloading, ready to come back with the next argument from our side to justify why we're right, especially if we're lions and winners like both of us happen to be.
Which is why the verse, if the verse that we got for that one,
Proverbs 18,
this Proverbs 18:13, spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. And we quote that at each other sometimes. You're not listening, you're answering and spouting, Yeah.
Take the time to listen genuinely. It's again not easy to do because we're sort of, for whatever reason, programmed to be ready to reload and come back again. But actually stop and think, what are they actually saying here? Because quite often it's just a misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding, and by taking the time to listen, you can actually find out what it is they're trying to say. And you go, now I get it. No reason for an argument. Not always as easy as that, but sometimes you've got an easy way out there. Take the time to listen. And then the third one, don't be a shrike, is an interesting analogy. You like sharing this analogy.
I love sharing this one. Apologies for the kind of gruesome picture, but it just so makes the point, because a shrike is a carnivorous bird that literally takes its victim, impales it on barbed wire, and then just picks it apart. And that's how we can turn up. We can bring in issues from the past. We can use accusatory tones. We can just, pick at the other person. So don't be a shrike. And I think if you remember anything, you might remember the image. It's just don't do that. Use softer tones. And if you have something hard to say that can be hard to hear, whisper it. Not through gritted teeth, but just whisper it to say, this really is a problem and the issue is this, and just stick to the issue, attack the issue and not the person.
And that's essentially what Proverbs 15:1-4 is saying, isn't it? Which is in the NIV, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Kind word in verse 4, kind words help and heal, cutting words wound and maim.
Yeah. Wound, cutting words wound and maim. Yeah. And that's what we don't want to be doing. So we're going to have to wrap it up now. The last thing we want to share with you is, after the conflict, take time to reconnect, because every conflict situation will drain something from the relationship. Any relationship with your boss, your co-workers, your children, your spouse, partner, take the time to reconnect. Learn the lesson, because if you don't learn the lesson, if you don't get better understanding out of that conflict, you're going to end up repeating the class. We don't want to repeat the class. Get the point, take the time to understand what was causing it and what you need to do differently. Apologize and forgive. And there's a wonderful book called The Five Languages of Apology by Gary Chapman that helps you understand people hear apologies differently. And the better we are at speaking the apology in a way the other person can hear it, the more they feel like justice is done. And you can repeat.
And it explains exactly why you can say sometimes, I apologize, but I've apologized to you. Why won't you get it? And they say, no, you haven't apologized yet, because we have different ways of hearing an apology. And so it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it to you. There's a book out there. There are also videos on YouTube talking a little bit about it. Gary Chapman himself talking about it. But it helps really understand why sometimes people will say to you even that they've apologized and you don't really feel they have. So a great one to go through there.
I've just seen a note that we need to take the taskbar out, but we're pretty much done. The last thing is to do something meaningful together, because something that would help to restore warmth. So if you like going for a walk, if you want to sit and have a chat over coffee or a drink, if you just want to sit on the sofa, if you just whatever it is that's appropriate to the relationship, make sure you have some way of saying, are we good now? Have we emotionally addressed it, and can we move on, to make sure that the relationship doesn't feel drained and damaged all the time. So the point that we're sharing through all of this, and apologies for going over time, but as you can tell, there's so much we wanted to say.
We did warn you.
The point that we wanted to leave with you is you have the opportunity, you have the potential, the power, by practicing these tips, to turn up better, have better conversations even during conflict, and get better results, so that you can look after each other and come out stronger. And that's why we talk about habit number 2, be careful, not crushing. And the verse that we hold each other accountable to is Ephesians 4:32.
Yep.
And that's what we, call each other out on sometimes. Be kind. If we could just stop there.
Yeah.
Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you.
For me, the bit that just captures it all there is that word tender-hearted right in the middle there. Are you being tender-hearted? Because if you are, that's what communicates the desire to make the other person be heard. We all have this need to be validated. If you're being tender-hearted, you will come across as that.
Yeah.
So really important to have that one there.
We don't get it right all the time, but we're on the journey.
We're trying to learn too.
So even though we're a million miles out of time, we're open to any questions. Did we address the question about how do you deal with it?
Well, I hope so. With the 3 points there. Feel free to send us another email. You may not want to disclose who you are, but feel free to send us another email if you think we addressed the question there about how do you when your mind is telling you just want to get out of there. Hopefully we've given you a few tips to actually stay and recognize why it's important to stay and address the conflict and move on from there.
So somebody Celia sharing a funny story. Years ago, she was fuming at Christopher being silent when I was off on one, stomped upstairs knowing I was wrong and knew I needed to hear from God, but was not in a good place. Do you know, one of the things here's a prayer. I'll share my prayer with you. One of the things, whenever I'm really upset with John, I'll find my corner with God and I say, God, change him or change me. We can't both be right. Change one of us. And he does. And sometimes it's me. And you have to be willing to deal with that.
We should probably hand back to Trevor and Maria.
Yeah, we should.
Questions there. And if there are other questions, we're happy to stay here, guys, but happy to hand back.
No, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much. It's really great to hear all this stuff. But I've written some of the questions down that we've had this evening. And although some of the things you probably answered, as we went along, I think it'd be worth just going through them, because just to reiterate the points so that we get a clear answer. So the first one that came in was, how do you deal with a really strong personality who might be intimidating and don't want to deal with it right there and then?
Yeah. So firstly, if there was an opportunity to explain the different personality types and how they were landing with you, because sometimes people like lions roar and they expect you to roar back, and they have no clue how intimidating they're coming across. And most of them would never want to be coming across like that, but that's just how their personality lands with a gentler personality. So being able to explain or articulate firstly that this is how you're feeling is important, or this is how their behavior is landing with you, but also giving yourself permission to push back and say, as long as you're shouting, we can't have this conversation. I can't even think with that going on. Can we talk about it later? Can we talk about it tomorrow or something? And feel empowered to do it, because it's not going to go anywhere if you feel intimidated by them.
Thank you, Neil. That's good, because if you're a golden retriever and your partner's a lion, I guess that's the situation where you need to go, whoa, stop.
Yeah.
Totally.
Because often the lion, as Andrew was saying, the lion doesn't realize how they're coming across.
Yeah.
Actually, lions have tender hearts. They really do. But they just don't realize how they're coming across. They have good intentions, but they just think, well, that's all they know. They come out like that.
Yeah.
So.
And again, we don't want to label or label anybody, because nobody is pure anything.
They're all a mix.
And all the different mixes of the personality types can work when we become more self-aware and adjust our approach and be more caring in who we're relating to and how our behavior or strength of personality might land with them.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
There's one question I wanted to ask, actually. I'm sure that there are maybe some people watching this who are maybe living with someone, they're a Christian, but the person that they're sharing a house with possibly aren't a Christian. How do they not try and take the right stance on things and obviously be a Christian in their attitude to the other person?
That's an easy one for you there.
Sorry.
Well, so outside of theological debates and moral stance about what's right and wrong, it's the same for Christians or non-Christians in turning up well and being caring with the other person, focusing on what the issue is, having a conversation rather than an argument or getting angry to the extent, it's doing to others what you would want them to do to you. That rule applies for everybody. As Christians, we need to model love more. Yeah. So the onus would be on us. I love that word. Did you ever check that out? Onus spells on us. Mm-hmm. The onus is on us to show up well and to be caring no matter how angry we are.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And you know what I love about this whole thing is that when we talk about relationships, we often think it's about marriage, it's about boy, girl, but we're not just talking about that. Every relationship we have, whether it's in the office, whether it's at home with our daughters, our sons, our flatmates, even somebody we have to do business with. It's a relationship which has to be worked on, doesn't it? And all these points are really helpful towards that. But listen, some other questions that came up. If there isn't actually a compromise at the end, how do you move forward? That's an interesting question.
So rather than compromise, we'd like to offer the word collaborate, because remember, compromise is about the cupcake and fighting over whose half is bigger, which is an oxymoron, but there you are. Whereas collaborate is about putting all the issues on the table and together coming up with a more creative solution where it's win-win for everybody.
What's best for us as a team, as a relationship? What's the best solution here? It could be your answer, could be my answer, could be something different we haven't even thought about before. But if you approach it with that mindset of how can we, what's the best thing for this unit here? If you approach it with that mindset, not about me, not about you, but about us, then you often come up with a better solution.
Yeah.
That's the collaboration piece Andrew was talking about.
So within that, there might be a bit of compromise on your part where you have to give up something, but it's for the greater good. It's for the relationship to thrive and everybody to win. That's what we're after.
Thank you. And just to remind everybody at home, it's not Andrew and Jonathan's bedtime yet, so you can still answer a question and pop it up in the chat and we'll pick it up. The next one I've got here is, how would you ever deal with someone who's taking a win position? So someone's obviously experienced this. I think you explained that, but I think it might be worth just.
So similar to what we said before to the previous question, it's about if they're taking a win position, helping them to understand how what they're doing is impacting you, and finding a way to have them pause, because somebody who takes a win position sometimes won't even pause to hear the other person, but to say, just give me 2 minutes and hear me out, because we're not seeing eye to eye on this. To articulate your point, because sometimes eventually they get it. Sometimes sadly they won't, and you have to have another go, and that's repeating the class, but that's life. We're dealing with people, and that's why we do these sessions, because the more we can plant a different perspective in people's minds, the easier it is for them to realize that the whole world isn't reading their minds, the whole world isn't in your head. They actually think differently to you, and the better we get at listening, the better we can hear what the other person's issue is rather than assuming.
And just to add to that, it may even be, I mean, there's nothing to say that this conflict, this argument has to be resolved here and now, face to face. It could be that you go away and you write them a note, or you write them a letter just explaining your position and your thoughts or what have you. Because quite often what you find is some people feel they're not particularly articulate, or in the moment to come up with the right words. And when they go away, they've thought of all the right words, but I wish I'd said that at the time. So go away and write it down and, articulate your point and then put that forward.
Yeah.
It may be that you write it down and then you want to talk about it, or you just give them the letter or what have you.
Yeah, that's a very, very good call.
Not everybody's articulate. And what you'll find is the otters tend to be articulate people anyway. The ones who want and like to negotiate and compromise, you're normally pretty articulate people. So if you're not one of them,
not that he's pointing fingers,
not that I'm pointing fingers or anything. They're pretty articulate people. They're good at getting their point across. And when you've got a combination of a lion otter like Andrea is, you've got to find different ways to get through.
But like I said, I believe my own rhetoric. In my head, it is so clear, but I'm learning to listen.
Well, I always think of that scripture, Corinthians 13, love is patient.
Yeah.
There you go. It's kind. And we talked about kindness tonight. But patience, the first one, I often point that out to people. Patience is in there. And sometimes, wanting to get to the end of a conflict isn't always possible in one session.
Yeah.
So you just have to be patient and say there'll bound to be another point when it comes up again. So are you still happy to carry on? We've got a few more questions. You still good?
Yep. Yeah, we're
still good.
Great stuff.
Good for another 5 minutes, so we don't end up in conflict with the boys who are waiting on us to watch a movie.
Right. Yeah. Managing relationships.
All right.
So this next one, we talked about space earlier, and this one, someone asked, how long should space be, especially when things still need to be discussed? I suppose the patient thing comes into that as well.
Yeah, but sometimes people use space to run away, and that's not good.
Yeah, it can't be too long.
You have to come back to it. So we always say, I don't know, maybe an hour if necessary, just time for the emotions to calm down. Again, it depends on the personality. And look, a lot of this is having to unlearn habits and relearn new ones, and you don't get there overnight. So patience with each other as we learn to do conflict better is the important thing.
Yeah, sweeping it under the carpet isn't going to work. You have to come back to it, so don't leave it too long.
Yeah. I've just seen a question from Ben, which is a really big, great one. What about when you come up against family culture, dealing with in-laws who communicate in different ways? And that's a whole other topic on its own. In Habit 3, we talk about ask, don't assume. And underlying all of that is these core values and behaviors that we each have from our culture, from our family of origin, that determine how we feel respected. And when those are crossed, it can really cause serious conflict and damage in the relationship. That's a whole topic on its own. But I suppose the short answer to that is to understand their cultural context and understand what they need to feel respected and for communication to go well. That's the shortest way to say it, isn't it?
Yeah. And I will take the time to recognize that there's a reason why they're behaving differently. What's that? We had the awesome opportunity of living in Japan for a year, and in Japan, the people that I think had the most miserable time were the expats who expected everything to go the way it did back home, In Japan, it doesn't, and you ain't going to change it. If either you go with the flow or you have a miserable time. And I think if you adopt that approach of people are who they are, you're not going to be able to change them. If they change, fair enough, but you can't change them.
The example we like to use is, the boys have two very different grandmothers. One is very much about protocol and doing things proper and all the manners and the handshake and taking your hat off and so on. The other one is far more free-flowing and laid back, and she'll have you do makeup of all different things all over, and she's totally chilled, very down to earth. They know how they need to relate to each. It's communication, but it's understanding the cultural context that helps them build a strong relationship with both of them, because they know which lines not to cross and what means disrespect to each. Yeah. And that's what we just need to become. There's a term out there in the corporate world, become more culturally fluent. And as the world becomes more global and we have more intercultural relationships on teams, in families, we need to be more aware of what respect looks like and what disrespect looks like in each culture, so that we can treat people well.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. I think we're really drawing to a close now. You can see the lights going where we are. I'm getting darker and darker.
I also see my Mac says your battery is low and will die soon unless unplugged or plugged in. So, for all sorts of reasons.
It's been a fantastic evening. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for everybody that's joined us. We just want to mention that if you have any more questions, please feel free to send your questions into info@soulmates.academy. I think that's going to pop up on your chat in a second. And just, be kind to yourself. Be kind to the people around you, as Jonathan and Andrea have said. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week. Remember, if you want to recap on this, you can watch it again. It's on Facebook. And you can still ask questions. So bless you all. Thank you, Jonathan and Andrea. Let's wave goodbye and say au revoir.
Au revoir. Au revoir. Have a good night. All right. Take care. Bye.